Hello and welcome, star people. This is APM, your intrepid star guide and cosmic detective, and this is another episode of the Outlaw Astrology podcast. This is episode 160, and we are going to be having a nice little chat today. Beyond the Golden Dawn is where we're going, and we're going to be interrogating the inherited correspondence, and we're going to build a tarot astrology system that honors both rigorous thinking and lived mystical experience. Today's focus is the moon and the sun, the two luminaries, two consciousness states, two ways of knowing, examining their golden dawn assignments and exploring the politics of light versus dark, questioning whether these cards deserve more complex contemporary correspondences. A little housekeeping first. We're nearing the end of the major arcana in this series. After this, we'll be tackling judgment and the world, and then we will move on from there. So this is advanced work for those ready to become intellectual outlaw mystics rather than passive inheritors of tradition. And we are on Pinterest and Instagram. You can find those links in the show notes. And if you could like, share and subscribe, and also review, give us 5 stars, thank you very much, so that others can find us with ease and we can continue to thrive as a podcast. And there is a free and paid newsletter called the Daily Stargazer, 500 archived posts, 80 and continuing episodes of the podcast for that. So there's a lot behind the wall there. And also, which I did not say previously, all episodes of this particular podcast on this topic are free. So you're free to go there, sign up and read them all, or read all the ones that are free. But these ones, if you prefer to read rather than just listen, you can go and do that with the link in the show notes. I appreciate you all. Thank you very much for spending time with me today. And we're going to move on to the topic at hand. So, let's step on in. It's the moon. And what I like about this particular idea of the moon is the idea of states of consciousness that are very different from each other, that most people do not understand are states of consciousness. Most people don't think of the moon as a state of consciousness, which I find quite fascinating. So, the moon is Pisces, illusion, or is it the truest sight we have? That's the question. So, the Golden Dawn assignment, the moon equals Pisces, disillusion, dreams, illusion, the unconscious, confusion, psychic sensitivity. So, let's acknowledge that bit straight away right here. Pisces does capture the moon's liminal quality, the boundary dissolving between worlds quality, the two towers, the path between domestication and wildness, the crayfish emerging from the deep. And then that deep would be the unconscious, okay? So, let's complicate it. Is calling the moon illusion a dismissal of non-rational ways of knowing? Does the Piscean assignment overemphasize confusion at the expense of the moon's oracular, visionary, shadow truth-telling function? Yum, yum, yum. Let's explore a few alternatives. So, Cancer. The moon's rulership, emotional intelligence, ancestral memory, the womb and tomb. Or Neptune. So it could be Cancer, that's the moon's rulership, sorry about that. Next, Neptune, mystical vision, disillusion of ego, spiritual madness. Interesting. Black moon Lilith, the wild feminine, refusal of false light, seeing what others won't. Scorpio, psychological depth, transformation through darkness, occult knowledge. My choice is Virgo because I feel moon energy needs to be more grounded. And in my life, emotion needs to be grounded in the body, as does the mind. If one allows the mind to run off, it will run off and do all sorts of things. And my mind likes to cause trouble because it's easily bored, okay? And so, for me, Virgo is grounded energy. It is thinky, but it's very earthbound energy, as opposed to Gemini energy, which tends to be a bit more airy, and I don't want to add more air. Add air where water typically is, because to me, air and water are very similar in their shape-shifting abilities. So I'm like, do I want to add more water to the energy of the moon card, which already has water to it? So I chose Virgo because it's discerning. It's grounded. It's practical. It's refining. It's sorting things out. It is embodied wisdom. It isn't just, this is how I feel. It's also, where do I feel it? How do I feel it? And what does this information about my emotions tell me? You see, Virgo energy is mental, but it's also grounded in the world, meaning that it wants to take action on what it feels. If it has a thought with an emotion added to it, it wants to act. And I feel that medicine-wise, this card needs me to be grounded, not up in the air in my head too much, and not too much in the ocean of my emotions, which is why I chose that. But this card does also have a political dimension. And the political dimension is the patriarchal occultism that has historically deemed lunar knowing as lesser than solar reason. So, reclaiming the moon card as a site of legitimate essential intelligence rather than mere illusion is an act of epistemological revolution. So, I encourage personal exploration. And here's some questions. When has the moon card appeared in your readings? Was it a warning of deception? A revealing of a deeper truth in that our rational minds refuse to see or agree with? What planetary energy best captures your lived experience of this card? As I've said, Virgo captures the lived experience of this card for myself, which is why I currently use it, but it could change, obviously. Let's move on to the sun. And so the sun is Leo, or the dangerous simplicity of positive thinking. So you might consider this card, and if you don't, I do. So I'll lead with that by straight away. This card for me is spiritual bypassing. It is simplicity of just think positive in the face of overcoming obstacles, challenges, etc. So for me, I feel that Leo for this card is a little simpler than I would prefer my readings to be. And so, let's look at the Golden Dawn assignment. The sun equals the sun itself, often linked to Leo. Joy, vitality, success, consciousness, achievement, childlike wonder, clarity. So that is how I see the star card, because that's what Leo brings. Leo brings joy. It brings childlike wonder. It brings a sense of clarity after one's challenges. And so that's why it doesn't work as well for me for the sun card, although for a while I accepted it until I started questioning it. So, what works with this card? Okay, the sun's association with solar energy, warmth, visibility, life force, creative power. The conscious self feels deeply right and needs no complication for many readers. I exempt myself from that. I think it's clear, but I like to pound that point home. But let's introduce the shadow into this. Has the New Age culture and positive psychology distorted the sun card into toxic positivity? Has this card become a spiritual bypass? Just think happy thoughts that denies necessary darkness, grief, rage, inner child work, shadow work. Let's complicate things a bit. Is the sun card truly about individual achievement and personal radiance, or is it about collective illumination, shared resources, and the dangerous truth that too much light can blind and burn? So let's explore some alternatives and additions. Apollo. No, I mean, yes, that is a asteroid. We could do that because Apollo took over being the sun god after the Titan that was originally the sun god, Helios, High Noon, stopped being the sun god when that new pantheon took over. So yeah, Apollo could definitely do it. Rationality, prophecy, medicine, but also plague and destruction. We could go with the fixed fire sign of Leo, creative sovereignty, but also ego inflation. There are other, we can do esoteric, the sun via esoteric, which was, could be Christ consciousness, imperial power, colonization, colonial civilizing missions, etc. For me, I feel that my choice is the element of fire, which is highly archetypal. The sun is definitely very fiery, provides warmth, it provides vitality, it is the creative principle that helps this planet continue to thrive. And I feel that keeping it to its simplest essence makes that signal of the sun a lot less distracting. If I'm not also filtering it through the sign of Leo, it becomes less of a challenge. We got fire, uplifting, warming, enthusiastic. But we also have the fact that too much fire can burn. It can be harmful. And there are many myths and stories of what happens to people, what happens to mortals when they got their hands on fire or got too close to the sun, in the case of Phaeton, who was first Helios, the Titan who was the sun god, their child, and then eventually Apollo the story was retold with Apollo as the sun god, and you can see riding too close to the sun in more than a few stories can be a challenge. Phaeton, if you don't know the myth very quickly, did something similar, got on the father's chariot, rode too close to the sun, the horses lost control of the chariot, which is pulling the sun across the sky to, bring us light and warmth, okay, and lost control of those horses and ended up in the ocean, and that story ends badly. The same thing happened to Icarus when he flew too close to the warmth. So this card does have that sort of egoic, undoing energy to it, in addition to having that enthusiasm, because neither of these stories are about someone being a bad person. It's about the fact that they were young, enthusiastic, and a bit overconfident. And that is what led to their downfall, trying to fly too close to the sun or to pull the sun itself across the sky. Speaks of vainglory. So the sun, in addition to being warming and enthusiastic and sustaining of all life, and that's the creative force, it also has the downside of egoic consciousness, as allowing our egos to have too much of a say, or following that, or how enthusiasm, etc., can lead us astray, or how I was going to say something else, and then I decided to edit that because this could go on for a while. But the sun equals fire, gives us that creative power, gives us the warmth, the vitality, it gives us clarity, it gives us joy, and it also points toward ego, and it points toward our sometimes overconfidence and over-enthusiasm, which can result into some really unfortunate choices that we have to live down the consequences. So, hence my choice. It keeps that signal of the sun free of distortion, so I can interpret that signal more clearly, which is why I chose the fire element, which is an archetype for this card. But we can also discuss timing and seasons, because here's the thing, the sun and the moon are very much about timing and seasons. out of all of the planets in the zodiac. I mean, in the astrological pantheon, these two are the most like it. These are the luminaries. So the sun card appears differently in winter versus summer. So in the global north versus the global south. So does a fixed solar correspondence honor lived, embodied in seasonal experience, or do we need something more flexible and location specific in our interpretations? We definitely have to consider that when we're doing our associations. So let us think about the luminaries as a pair: duality, hierarchy, or dialectic. Okay, so the traditional pairing: the moon is feminine, passive, receptive, unconscious, versus the sun, masculine, active, projective, conscious. This binary has dominated Western esotericism for centuries. So let's question the hierarchy. Why is solar knowing valued over lunar knowing? Why is consciousness deemed superior to unconscious? Who benefits from the hierarchy? So let's explore the non-binary alternatives. What if the moon and sun, the cards, represent two equally valid, mutually necessary modes of perception rather than opposing forces? What if they are a dialectic? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, rather than a hierarchy. I like the dialectic for myself. That's what I'm endeavoring to do in my own practice. So I'm looking for thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, okay? So let's look at some lived experience here. Nocturnal people, night shift workers, those with seasonal affective patterns, people in polar regions like Antarctica, the Arctic and Antarctica, for example. How do they experience these cards? Do these traditional sun, good, moon, confusing frameworks serve these people as well? Let's also consider cultural context. Solar worship dominates Abrahamic and Greco-Roman traditions, but many indigenous and pre-colonial cultures centered lunar calendars, lunar deities, and lunar cycles as primary. So what happens when we de-center the sun? Now, a note from my own practice. I do not tend to vibrate to dualities. I'm more interested now in seeing beyond them. I'm more of a both-and person. That being said, knowing that solar worship tends to predominate in certain cultures and certain traditions is far more interesting. But what I find juicy is the knowledge that many indigenous and pre-colonial cultures centered lunar calendars, lunar deities, etc. So that be Mayan, Aztec, and other cultures around the world, where the lunar calendar is still very much in play. I am more oriented towards that. And that is not to say I think the sun is wonky or a problem or any of that right now. It's just I'm oriented toward the lunar right now, and I do not see these as opposites. I see them as a pair that work together. They're not dualities, meaning this, that. That's very black and white thinking, and that made sense that the people who came up with this originally were at the end of the 19th, early 20th century, when psychology was very much nascent in its infancy, and all that logical thinking was still not, logic was still very, still trying to sort that out. By the way, logic is an external system, process and protocol that you impose on things. Reason is internal, logic is external, meaning that people are not logical, they're reasonable. Logic is something you impose, which is what science does when people study things. Science has a protocol. That is logic being imposed on exploration and experimentation. Okay, so I want to decenter the sun. I don't want the sun to be more important, because I think that consciousness is big enough to consider both perspectives of the sun and the moon without the sun overtaking the moon, or without the moon having to look at the sun, which is typical for astrology as well. And so I am going to propose something more radical. What if the moon card is more a more advanced spiritual technology, the one that requires comfort with paradox, shadow, multiplicity, ambiguity. What if the Sun is the beginner's card? It's comforting, but a bit simple or simplistic. Okay, what if that is how it really is? And the whole point of mentioning this is to put these type of questions and thinking out there, because when faced with questions that step outside of our comfort zones, that's when the growth has a tendency to happen, rather than if we just ask the same questions that make us feel safe and comfortable. And so, let's look at how to work with these two energies. So, in practice, ritual spreads, timing, etc. So, ritual 1, you can read with the moon card at night and the sun card during the day. My fingers are tingling. I like this idea. Notice if the card's meaning shift with natural light conditions, and does the context change the interpretation. Ritual 2. Track these cards across a lunar cycle. So if the moon or sun card appears in your readings, note the actual moon phase or solar season. Are these patterns? So, we're sitting around here, and let's just say we got ourselves a last quarter moon in Aquarius, off the top of my head, just playing around, and the season is Taurus. That would be the sun in Taurus. Okay. Does that say anything? Does that pattern speak? Does an emotion well up in the body? Okay. What thoughts well up in the mind? What questions does this inspire us to ask? What do we notice in our environment, etc.? I like. All right, and here's a spread suggestion. This is a luminary dialectic spread. Has 3 cards. The first is what the sun reveals, conscious understanding, surface clarity. 2, what the moon reveals, unconscious knowing, hidden truth, depths. 3, the synthesis or the next step that honors both. Okay? Correspondences, let's experiment. So, spend 1 month reading the moon card as Scorpio Pluto, depth psychology, occult truth, instead of Pisces. Does it change one's interpretations? Does it feel more empowering, less dismissive of lunar knowing? Okay? And here is a general prompt if you are interested. Write about the time you were in the dark, and that turned out to be wiser than seeing clearly. This is the moon card's medicine. Then write about a time that clarity was genuinely healing. This is the sun card's gift. And notice which story feels more culturally rewarded. Because I assure you that one of them is going to stand out more than the other, depending on your own lived experience. Okay, and that wraps that up. And here's the key takeaway here. The moon and the sun carry centuries of cultural bias. Lunar knowing dismissed as confusion. Solar knowing celebrated as consciousness. But the outlaw mystic questions this hierarchy and builds a tarot and astrology practice as well that honors both light and dark as equally sacred, equally necessary, equally true, equally authentic. So, this week, pull the moon or the sun card intentionally and ask, what have I been taught to believe about the sun or the moon that isn't true? Let the cards speak back and write down what you hear. Okay, episode 161 will be the Judgment and the World cards, Apocalypse, Completion, and the Dangerous Promise of Transcendence. How do we end the major arcana without spiritual bypassing? And a little housekeeping before we go. We have a free and paid version of the newsletter. This podcast episode and all proceeding in this topic are available for free, so that if you prefer to read it or you prefer to look at it once again and copy it down and notice things for your own notes, feel free. Maybe you just like to read rather than just listen, and that's cool too, so feel free to do that. We are on Instagram and on Pinterest. You can find that link in the show notes, along with the link to the newsletter, which has a large archive of 500 and going, 80 and ongoing episodes of both posts and podcasts behind that wall, and it's free and paid. So feel free to step into that. We appreciate you. And also like, share, and subscribe. That helps us get the word out about what we're sharing here, gets more interested parties in, and it helps the podcast thrive. Thank you very much as well. And all of these notes are all of these links in the show notes. I appreciate you for being here. Thank you very much. And as always, peace, love, astro magic, star people.